Hi and welcome back to another video. I'm Shubhrotham and so in today's video I'm going to talk to you guys about Prakriti and Purusha. Obviously in the previous video I touched upon what Prakriti and Purusha means, but I'm just going to go a bit in depth in this video. So why is it important for everybody who is practicing yoga and spirituality to know about matter and spirit? Well, if you don't know about what matter is, you're not going to know about what spirit is, and spirit can be known only when you know that matter is different from spirit. The peculiar thing about Indian philosophy is that we have a very different concept of the mind as opposed to Western philosophy and, Western psychology, because more or less the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali is basically a form of Indian psychology. It's a study of the mind and consciousness. So there's a thing called manas, or what is translated into mind. The peculiar thing about the Indian way of describing this is that mind is called chitta, okay? And chit also means consciousness, but not exactly, okay? So this chit consists of manas, the mind proper, an instrument that takes in information and gives it back out, something like the brain. And then you've got buddhi, intelligence. And then there is a third element which is called aham, the sense of I, the ego. You don't find this same concept when it comes to Western psychology or even philosophy. And so it becomes even more fascinating and interesting in the way Indian philosophy goes about, talking about creation and what matter is and what spirit is. So, according to Indian philosophy, there is a God, which is Purusha Vishesh, which is also a combination of Purusha Vishesh, the exclusive Godhead, the soul, along with Mool Prakriti, which is the root nature, what has been come to be called as source, source. And this God over here, for the most part in Indian philosophy, is non-dual. There is no plurality, you know, and you find the same concept being echoed in Islam, where they talk about a monotheistic God, only one God without any shape, name, or form. They just they call it as Allah. And in Christianity, there's the whole thing about God, the divine spirit, the Father and the Son, the Trinity. Again, at the top of all of these things is one element, one particle. And I don't mean particle in a material way. So you have Prakriti, which is Purusha, and I'm sorry, you have Prakriti, which is not Purusha. Prakriti has its own separate working. The mind, the chit, not the mind, the chit, comes from an element called Mahat. Mahat is cosmic consciousness, okay? And behind Mahat is Mool Prakriti. So, let's look at how Indian philosophy goes about describing, how this one unique God became manifold and separated itself into Prakriti, which is nature, and then Purush, which is soul. And how by knowing the difference between these two entities, we can get back to our true home, which is with that one God. So, I have a few notes over here to help me, which helps me explain things a lot better. So, this is something that I studied a long time ago, and when I practice yoga, I don't practice it just for the sake of health and, raising my energies. There is a very philosophical um, approach towards it, because I do want to know what the spirit is. I do want to know where my true self is. I know the body's going to go away, and I know it's not always, at least from what I know, it's not always a comfortable experience, Um, we've gotten so used to, because we believe in rebirth, we've gotten so used to coming into material existence that we've forgotten that in essence we're actually soul that is more connected to God than matter. And so this is what really makes me curious about, what Prakriti is and what Purusha is, what matter is and what soul is. So God divides itself, according to the Sankhya system, which I explained in the previous video, into two entities, which is Purusha and Prakriti. And Prakriti has many workings of its own. It's so diverse as compared to Purush. Purush is not complicated. It's one simple entity. So Prakriti, in the form of Mul Prakriti, divides itself into what's called Mahat, which is cosmic intelligence. Okay, it's also cosmic consciousness. From Mahat, it divides itself, or by way of emanation, emanates itself or modifies itself into what's called Chitta. And as I explained earlier, Chit consists of mind, intelligence, and ego. From cosmic intelligence, apart from, let the ambulance pass by, apart from Chitta, there is also, from Mahat, or your cosmic consciousness, there are two very special deviations that Prakriti makes in her journey towards expansion, of the material propensity, of her material propensities. So in Sanskrit, it's called Linga and Vishesha, and the other part is called Alinga and Avishesha. So universal consciousness, or cosmic consciousness, divides itself from this point into three separate entities: Chitta, then Linga. You must have heard of this term when it comes to Shiv, the Linga. And Alinga, Avishesha. So Ling over here means to be manifest, to be able to see. Something which is tangible, something which has properties. Okay? Something that can be concretized through the senses. Okay? So basically, Linga means phenomenal and distinguishable. Alinga obviously means that which cannot be distinguished. And the first thing that cannot be distinguished, if you really think about it, is the ego. So much of talk goes on about, it was because you weren't conscious of your ego. It was because you weren't conscious of your higher nature. It was because you weren't conscious of your higher consciousness. That is because ego, or ahamkara, is indistinguishable. It's very hard to catch it out. Just like spirit, it's very hard to find out exactly what this ego is. And that's why so many of us get lost in the workings of the ego, because it's hard to distinguish. We think it's the mind. We think it's the intelligence. We think it's our personalities. But ego is actually a very, very separated element. It's a tool for consciousness to better manage the workings of nature, which is Prakriti. Okay? I explained already that nature means also energies. Remember that. It means energies. It also means consciousness, okay? But more of a material consciousness. And the one thing you have to understand about ego is that when we're talking about getting rid of the ego, you don't get rid of it. You transform it into its higher state. You know, anyhow. So from Linga, or distinguishable, comes the 5 elements, like I explained in the previous video on Prakriti and Purusha. And these 5 elements are Prithvi, earth, up, water, vayu, air, okay? Then Tej, fire, and then there's Akash, which is ether, okay? Akash also means sky. These things can be seen. These things are distinguishable. Now let's come to the things that cannot be distinguished. These are the subtle elements of nature. It's from water, okay? It is to smell. I'm sorry, from water it is to taste. From earth it is to smell. From fire it is to see form. From Akash it is to hear. Okay? And from up, earth, it is to be able to feel, touch. So you see, in terms of Indian philosophy, when they're talking about matter being separate from spirit, they're also going very deep into exactly what this is. They talk about nerves and sensations. They talk about emotions. When it comes to Indian classical music, for example, there is rag, you know, and rag also roughly translates to taste. You know, to feel the ras, or the juice, or the essence. So these things are not easily distinguishable, you know, touch, taste, sound. These things are nominal. Now, Alinga and Avishesha is less gross, it's less dense. Linga and Vishesha, which is the elements that you're able to see around you, okay, or that's within the body, these things can be seen, and these things are of a grosser, these things are more gross, okay? So from these gross elements comes the karma indriyas. Karma means to do, and indriya means organs of sense. So these karma indriyas, or karma indriyas, are your arms, your legs, speech, the reproductive organs, the excretory organs. And these again are connected to linga or vishesha, things that can be seen. And alinga, okay, which is not distinguishable, divides itself into the 5 elements, which are the subtle elements, which is of taste, touch, smell, etc. And they transform themselves into, or divide themselves into what's called jnanendriyas, or jnanendriyas, okay? And these are the organs of your organs of your senses, okay? There are the organs of action that I just explained, and there are the organs of your senses. That's your ears, your nose, okay? Your tongue, your eyes, your skin. So in this way, your consciousness, which is more connected to, which basically bridges the gap between nature and spirit, the consciousness acts as a doorway between the outside world and the inside world. And this is how Indian philosophers came to think about, you know, creation and what's going on, okay, in this sense. So from these organs of action and these organs of senses, whatever you see, whatever is interacting with the with the elements of nature, okay, all of this information is translated and is given to the chitta. Remember, the chitta over here is not the equivalent of what's in Western psychology known as the mind. But here, chitta means the combination of manas, which is mind, intelligence, and ego. So if I get burnt, the first thing I'm going to feel is the sensation of pain. Okay, and it's going to be translated in towards my mind. My intelligence is going to recognize that, okay, this is an increase of temperature. It's going to feel it as a sensation of burning, and that's being registered by the mind. And at the end, the one who registers this is the ego, ahamkara. The ahamkara is indistinguishable. So while you see the skin getting burnt and all kinds of modifications happening, the ego remains unmodified, but connected to nature and its workings. Little does the ego know that it can turn away from the workings of nature and bring itself closer to Purush, which is spirit. And that's the secret of yoga and the whole point of understanding philosophy, okay, Indian philosophy. It's to give the ego another point of view to look at and not just get preoccupied with the workings of nature. That's why there's the whole talk of detachment. That's why there are yogis who, in spite of great pain, there are yogis who have lost their limbs, who can, live in sub-zero temperatures, but they realize that their ability to detach is made more easier by going away from the workings of nature and closer to the spirit. And this is just not talk. They actually go within, they get in touch with the spirit, whether it's known to them or not, they can feel it. And spirit is said to be unborn. In the Bhagavad Gita, the spirit cannot be slain. The spirit cannot be harmed. It's unborn. It does not die. They connect with this immortal spirit and they become immortal. The body will go away. The body will get destroyed. But their egos are transformed. Their egos don't attach themselves to the pain, the sensations, and the phenomenal workings of nature. Okay. Now, nature works around certain properties that I already explained, which is sattva, rajas, and tamas. Sattva is of the color white, rajas is red, and tamas is black. And I've explained it in the previous video, so just take a look. All of the workings of nature in union and in connection with the workings of these properties, sattva, rajas, and tamas, gives rise to existence as is normally known, or material existence. So the whole point of moving away from the properties of nature is done in order to connect back to the spirit. There is always this trap that people get into, when they get into religion, and not that it's a bad thing. Remember, religion is always a stepping stone towards true spirituality. Remember that. But many times I'm talking about sattva, the quality of goodness. Many times, there is a tendency to get lost in this personal God, or what becomes idolization. It's not a bad thing. You need to know the alphabets in order to construct words and then construct sentences. But then After that, you don't need to learn ABCD every single day. It's it's there. It should be taken for granted. And people get stuck in this guna of sattva, and they don't get further beyond. What the yogi does is he goes beyond even goodness, because goodness is uh, as much a state of being enslaved as much as is of being attached to the various pleasures of life and the various pains that you feel as a consequence of these pleasures. um, Tamas, on the other hand, also roughly translates to mud, okay, or mudita, stupidity, because the senses are stupefied. There is just no capacity to make any kind of discernment. But in a sattvic state, yes. So, in transforming the properties of nature, it's important to purify the organs of senses. And that's why there are the various meditative practices, the kriyas, the bandhas, the mudras, the asanas. That's why there is this emphasis on a yogic diet. Because the more pure the mind is, the more it's going to, like I explained in the previous video, the more clearly it's going to be able to reflect whatever it is back to the soul. I spoke about this concept of Maya and illusion, and I explained exactly how that happens with respect to the soul. It's because the soul gets the information in this very corrupted and distorted way, because the organs of the senses are impure, you know. Anyhow, so the karmendriyas and the jnanendriyas act as a feedback system. So all of these elements basically revolve around the three gunas of nature, sattva, tamas, and rajas. So having said this, there are two paths available. One is to indulge in nature and get entrapped in it and to enjoy it, and also to, as a consequence, suffer afflictions, because when you indulge in nature, you do enjoy, but there's also something called rog, which is afflictions, and that also comes from Prakriti. Remember that a yogi is able to just go away from death like it was nothing, because they have fully identified themselves with the spirit. There is no more any identification with Prakriti. They see Prakriti as something that gives pain and afflictions. So it gives pleasure, but it also gives pain. And the yogi does not want this. The yogi wants moksha, or emancipation. And he or she goes back to Purush, the forever free. And this is when you understand that detachment is not just a mere ignoring of the workings of nature, or the ignorance of certain emotions that you feel. Detachment is to move away from the transitory, however you want to pronounce that word, towards the permanent. From things that are not going to last forever towards things that are permanent. And so you're basically moving away from Purusha and from Prakriti and towards Purusha. So when you're in an asana and let's say for example Trikonasana, right? You've completely stretched out the body. You feel the muscles behind the legs getting stretched evenly right down to the toes. And you feel that even on the left side of the body. You feel everything is in alignment. Okay? And in this state of absolute observation, what you notice is that the organs of action and the organs of perception start to move closer and closer towards the core. And this core, what B.K.S. Iyengar used to talk about, is actually the Purush, the soul. I'm sorry. When the organs of action and the organs of perception are in a rajasic state or in a state of kineticism, it's not going to be able to move towards sattva, and from sattva it's not going to be able to move towards purush, the soul, towards consciousness first and then towards the soul, because the properties of nature, remember, they act as a veil in front of what we call the soul. The whole point of practicing asanas and doing the pranayams and all of these things is to bring these properties of nature into a balance, or actually into a state of rest. And these things are more easily understood when you actually experience the effects while performing the asanas and the pranayams. So when the organs of the action and when the organs of perception start to calm down and move closer and closer towards the soul, when you breathe in, you will notice that your breath goes and hits your perineum, that area. And if you've been practicing mudras and bandhas well, you will notice that as compared to earlier, there is no more a leak of energy. You will be able to feel it. You will feel that all that breath that you took in has been absorbed. And in yoga, we believe that, the air just doesn't go in. Along with air comes prana, which actually also means the electrical currents that go up and down your spine. They're both one and the same. You breathe in, the current goes down. You breathe out, the current goes up. When you're practicing Kundalini Yoga, it's to bring these two currents into one union, to bring Ida and Pingala nadis into one union, into Sushumna. And so when you breathe in, it hits the perineum, and now there's a lock because of that practice of the bandhas and the mudras. And then when you breathe out, instead of the movement going outward, instead of the prana moving out, or consciousness more correctly going outward, it goes inward and upward. There is a movement of ascension. And when you keep practicing this kind of what's actually called a kriya, because this is a kriya, it's a pranayama kriya. And if you've heard of Lahiri Mahashay, okay, a famous Bengali guru who actually came up with the whole, who founded, was one of the first founders of Kriya Yoga. He actually came up with this breathing technique, which apparently was given to him by Mahavtar Babaji, who was his guru. And then later on it was passed on to Yukteswar Giri, who was Yogananda's master, and so on and so forth. So this is Kriya Yoga. At the end of the day, it's about moving away from the activities of nature, the manifest, in towards the unmanifest, and then even deeper back inside, towards consciousness. And from consciousness, it goes towards Mool Prakriti. And when it goes to Mool Prakriti, what happens is that you realize that there are in fact two distinct workings of existence as a human being. There is one, the material body that I have and the energies associated with it, that also seems to reflect the same kind of workings that's going on around nature. And that's why they say that the human body is the microcosm and the universe is the macrocosm. But you can't go beyond it. And once you realize that, okay, I've hit a dead end, Some people think or tend to mistake this whole universe or the material universe to be, that ultimate God. And they don't look towards the other side, which is the soul. That's because you're trying to understand something that is immaterial from the point of view of something that is material. So, how is it that you understand just through jnana? How is it that you understand what the spirit is? Well, you first need to know the geography of matter, like I just explained right now. And it is so in depth, when we're talking about transformation of the organs of the senses, transformation of ego, transformation of the properties of nature, because tamas, which is inertia, which is connected to matter, can be transformed into solid rest, into a kind of yogic rest, which actually gives rise to one of the highest kind of samadhis.
Super.
Oh,
Hi.
oh, scusa, I was just doing a video. Yeah. So then you have rajas, and rajas is usually kineticism, it's passion, and they say it's a bad thing because it gives rise to ambition. But then it can be converted into vibrancy. Okay, and nature can be transformed. But Purusha or spirit does not need any kind of transformation. It doesn't have any kind of transformation to go through. It has no evolution to go through. But Prakriti does. And to aid in the evolution of Prakriti, that's where the soul steps in. So at the end of the day, when you understand what Prakriti is, and you see that there is an end, that it is not the soul, and that's when you really start to understand that, okay, this is not it, this is not it, this is not it, and this is not it. Through a constant cancellation of what's not the truth, you get to the truth. And this is the way of the Vedanta. Neti, neti, neti. No, it's not this. No, it's not this. And that's why a lot of the Jnana yogis took this path of knowledge. They just really focused their minds on the nature of existence. And they understood that, okay, so this is my consciousness. And then there are the workings of nature. And they pondered over it and pondered over it. And they got these insights, these flashes of intuition. And that's how you have the Indian philosophical way of describing what's nature and what's soul. And apart from being a very fascinating topic to look into, it has its own practical application, especially when you practice asanas, or even if you're just, meditating. So that's it from me in this video on Prakriti and Purusha. The first sign of you moving towards the soul and nature is that you're going to find that Prakriti starts to become more silent, because consciousness is sort of like, it's like how Bruce Lee said, it's like water, If you put water in a glass, it becomes the glass. If you put water into Prakriti, it's going to become Prakriti. If you put water into soul, it's going to become the soul. And so with this, I'm going to end this video and hit that like button, hit that like, and hit the subscribe button. Not that I care too much, it's just one of those things. But thank you so much, and I will join you guys in the next video where I'm going to be talking about mudras and bandhas and a little bit about Kundalini yoga. So I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.